when we say you'll be able to understand what we mean when we say abuse in later life and understand the extent of the issue. Also, there's some funding available to support abuse in later life. So you'll hear about the potential benefit to your community in accessing that funding. You'll learn about some resources that you can use to address abuse in later life in your community. And Janice Green will be describing all the various components of the program and how to apply for this funding stream. So we have a poll here. We really want to know who's joining us today. So if you could answer this poll, that would greatly help us. Anne, could I ask you to launch the poll? And I see it's changing quite a bit, so we're just going to wait a bit. Okay. All right, I think that's about it. Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. So let's learn about what we mean by abuse in later life and the extent of this issue. Krista. And you're on mute. Krista, you're on mute.
So sorry. 10,000 Americans are turning 65 every day. And so we say America is aging. Because of this fact, it's increasingly important that we're talking about abuse in later life. Over half of the population that are over 65 are women. Next slide, Marty. The demographic trends have seen an increasingly diverse population as it relates to race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religious affiliations, and all other sort of dimensions of diversity. This is going to create an even greater urgency for abuse in later life responses to understand and take into account an older adult's background, culture, and identity. Next slide, Marty. There are really many misperceptions about abuse in later life. So let's start by making sure that everyone is on the same page as to what we mean when we say abuse in later life. Listed here are some aspects that we're going to look at more closely in the coming slides. The definition of abuse in later life, the types of relationships that we're talking about with abuse in later life, and where this abuse occurs. NCALL defines abuse in later life as the willful abuse, neglect, abandonment, or financial exploitation of an older adult. Hold on, older adult being age 50 or more. So if you're like me and you're 50 or more, you're in the older adult category, by someone who's in an ongoing trust-based relationship. So a spouse, partner, family member, or somebody's caregiver with the victim. So one of these folks with the victim. NCALL also considers sexual abuse and stalking of an older adult by anyone, including strangers, to be abuse in later life. Our definition of abuse in later life does not include other types of abuse committed by strangers or self-neglect, which also does happen. Next slide, Marty. NCALL's definition of abuse in later life intentionally calls attention to the nexus between domestic violence, sexual assault, and elder abuse. While statutory definitions of elder abuse are going to vary, especially from different jurisdictions, we use the Elder Justice Roadmap definition. This definition includes different forms of abuse that include physical, sexual, or psychological abuse, neglect, abandonment, and even financial exploitation. Elder abuse can happen in any setting and focuses on the relationship being one where there is an expectation of trust, or when an older person is targeted based upon their age or their disability. Elder abuse is much broader than abuse in later life, which is a subset of elder abuse. Most research that you'll read or you'll watch focuses on elder abuse. This phrase, elder abuse, not the term abuse in later life. As a result, while this presentation addresses abuse in later life, the nexus between domestic violence, sexual assault, and elder abuse, we're going to reference elder abuse research data. So elder abuse is really a lot more prevalent than many people think. One study showed that 1 in 10 community residing older adults reported experiencing elder abuse in the previous year. So this number comes from a study that was done where people were called over the phone and 1 in 10 people identified that they had been an abuse victim. Keep in mind, this is a study where people had a landline, which a lot of older adults do, who were able to be reached over the phone and were willing and able to self-identify abuse or financial exploitation. This study and this statistic does not account for older adults who didn't have a landline or didn't answer the phone, or they had a cognitive capacity issue that prevented them from answering the question. It also doesn't account for those who are living in assisted living facility or some other facility. These were all community-based responses. So while this is a staggering number, 1 in 10, it is likely a low estimate. So this graphic you see here on this screen sort of illustrates the gravity of the reporting deficits that we should be concerned about. For every 1 case of abuse that is reported, we know that there are another 24 that are never reported. And those of you out there who work with older adults know that there are a lot of reasons why they don't report. And so this number probably does not surprise you. So who is experiencing elder abuse? Prevalence rates by type of abuse really vary across studies. Elder abuse does impact all genders. Studies have consistently shown that the majority of elder abuse cases involve female victims with spouses as perpetrators, meaning intimate partner violence is a significant portion of elder abuse. Older disabled adults are, as we would expect, particularly high risk of mistreatment. Older adults and adults with disabilities are often perceived by society as helpless and dependent. The vulnerability of individuals who are of older age and disabled may be compounded. But be cautious, please, about making assumptions about older adults. Aging does not equal incapacity. We all age differently. You're going to have 90-year-olds who are running marathons, and you might even have 50-year-olds who have mobility issues. Everyone's going to be different. With this slide, I just want to highlight and reiterate that physical abuse in later life is often intimate partner violence. 57% of abuse is perpetrated by a partner. Next slide, Marty. There are a few studies about the prevalence of sexual assault of older adults, but the few studies we do have found that older adults report the perpetrator is most often their spouse or partner. In facilities, it's pretty evenly distributed between employees and other residents being the perpetrators. We also know that elder abuse can be perpetrated by those having a fiduciary relationship with victims and others who are in a position of trust or authority with the victim, such as family members, friends, caregivers, and trusted others. Next slide, Marty. Also, older adults who have been abused visit the emergency room 4 times more frequently than others of the same age.
All right. Well, now that we've kind of explored a little bit about the types of abuses and things that older adults experience, I want to talk a little bit about some of the risk factors that really place an older adult at a higher risk of abuse, as a person is often seen more vulnerable. So some examples are going to be that poor physical or mental health. There's that risk of being perceived as vulnerable and easier to exploit or abuse. There's the living situation that the older adult might be in, the risk of cohabitation with somebody who will take advantage of them. Social isolation is a huge risk factor. The family maybe has moved away or friends have passed away. They have a much smaller social support network to rely upon or to even report to. And then you have also substance abuse by the perpetrator. The risk of the older adult's medications being diverted, for example, for the perpetrator's use, or to have the perpetrator might choose to sell the medication. The perpetrator's mental health is also a risk factor. The risk is that the older adult will accept the abusive behavior because their loved one has issues, quote unquote issues. The mental health status of that perpetrator may make it difficult to care for the older adult. And then ageism, which is a risk that the abuse will not be recognized by professionals because of the ageist attitudes that are real prevalent in our society. Next slide. So why does it occur? Well, there are several factors that actually place an older adult at higher risk of abuse, as the person is oftentimes seen as more vulnerable. So some examples are going to, we're looking at that other slide. But why does it occur in later life? So one of the challenges of abuse in life cases is determining what has occurred and then not believing the excuses or the justifications of the abuse. So often in many financial cases, the motivation is greed. You might hear the perpetrators say they're going to leave me the money later when they die, so I'm just taking it now, I'm just spending my inheritance earlier. Their motivation is going to vary also, but it will and can include greed or perceived benefit to the abuser, such as that financial gain. In many cases, power and control dynamics that are similar to those seen in younger domestic violence cases are present. And some of the predators are going to target older adults because they believe they are more vulnerable. They may not report, and they may not be believed when they report. And also, the physical and mental health of a victim may come into play. Sometimes the abuser has dementia or mental health condition or physical condition that may affect their behavior, causing them to be violent. So that could be something that is the reason why it occurs, but it's really more frequently motivated by those top 3 of greed, benefits of the behavior, and the power and control dynamics. Next slide. So some barriers that we're going to touch on. First is that individual level barrier, where older adults will experience unique barriers that prevent them from seeking help addressing their abuse, including the lack of awareness of available resources, perhaps a commitment to their family, cultural and generational values around fear and abuse. Fear is also a real prevalent barrier, economic concerns, and also health issues. Older survivors from marginalized communities who seek services often encounter programmatic and systemic barriers to accessing relevant and effective supports. And relatedly, a dearth of culturally or linguistically appropriate services can increase the vulnerability to abuse for some older adults. Due to a lack of training and technical assistance, many professionals, organizations, systems, and other key entities may be unable to recognize and address abuse in later life. So just at that individual level, there are significant barriers to reaching out to access help. And then if we go to the next level of community level barriers, we need to think about that abuse in later life is often not recognized and is commonly lumped in with other types of victimization or completely dismissed altogether. It's really common for domestic violence and sexual assault service providers to not specifically plan services with older adults in mind. Similarly, adult protection services or aging services networks may not think of domestic violence and sexual assault when planning services. And I saw both of this when I was working with the abuse in later life grants 3 different times. The term abuse in later life then brings into focus how intentional collaboration between related fields is absolutely necessary to provide the most effective services, support healing and justice to older survivors, and really provide that holistic approach. Additionally, victim service agencies and systemic responses often do not take into consideration the unique experiences of traditionally marginalized and underserved groups, including those culturally specific communities, racial and ethnic groups that are outside of those who identify quote unquote as white, people who live in rural or isolated areas, and people for whom mainstream services do not work due to their religious beliefs, gender identity, sexual orientation, or due to language barriers or disabilities. Older victims, particularly those from the traditionally marginalized or underserved populations, often do not know where to turn for support, or if they do, they have a negative experience when they reach out for help. And as our nation's aging population is expanding every single day and becoming more diverse, a growing number of professionals will need current education and relevant resources to address the unique barriers, both at individual and community level, and the challenges older survivors of abuse face. Additionally, key intervening systems, including the justice system and social services, will need to collaborate effectively in order to coordinate seamless services and supports for older adults.
The Office on Violence Against Women recognized that this is a very complex and severely underreported issue, and they've dedicated funding to combat abuse in later life for that reason. We've been listening why this is so important. It really takes a multi-pronged approach to combat abuse in later life and to hold offenders accountable. And this program has an approach where there's funding for direct services, so it can increase the capacity of communities to support victims. Also, it recognizes that intentional interagency collaboration is very important in order to fully respond to these cases. And so it's a very comprehensive multi-prong approach to support victims of domestic and sexual violence, abandonment, neglect, stalking, who are age 50 and older. What I'd like to do now is invite our 2 former project coordinators to share what this looks like in your project. So let's start with the Norfolk, Virginia project and Krista.
So in Norfolk, my office, which is the Office of the Norfolk Commonwealth Attorney, which is a prosecutor's office to everyone who doesn't live in a Commonwealth, or district attorney's office, we applied for the grant, the Abuse in Later Life grant. We were the lead applicant, but we partnered with the Norfolk Department of Human Services, the Adult Protective Services Unit, the Norfolk Police Department, which we have one main police department in our city. We also partnered with the YWCA of Southampton Roads. We are essentially an urban area with 238,000 residents in about 66 square miles. So we're a small area with a good number of people in the small area. We are the third most populous city in the state of Virginia, and we're the home to the largest naval base and the North American headquarters for NATO. I will just say, sorry, Marty, I'm going to say one more thing. Our partners on this grant, we had a really strong history of collaborative partnership before we applied for this grant. Most of the agency heads have been working together for over 10 years and meet monthly prior to this grant and subsequent to the grant to discuss collaborative projects we could work on. Thanks, Marty. All right, so the abuse in later life funding allowed us to do so much. We were able to do a needs assessment to identify gaps in services. We knew that we had some gaps in services, and we knew we wanted specialized services for folks who were aging. We didn't know exactly what we needed or what those gaps were. So this funding allowed us to do an assessment to identify those gaps. Not only did it help us identify the services that we needed to try to implement or to make it more accessible, it allowed us to have evidence of those needed services to show to other service providers, city officials, and other funders. It also allowed us to identify available resources for older adults in the community that we were unaware of, so that we could help to connect people and provide better wraparound services. We were able to hire and train a full-time case manager who works exclusively with older adults that have been victims of crime. It allowed us to create collaborative partnerships with service agencies in our area that we hadn't really met or knew about, so that we could provide wraparound services to older adult victims. We created collaborative partnerships with the community and faith-based groups to provide assistance for older adults. Next slide, Marty. A little bit more about what we were able to do. We were able to, this grant allows you to attack these problems on different fronts. And so we created collaborative partnerships, we identified resources and gaps. We also were able to narrow training gaps, especially for abuse red flags. These training gaps that our law enforcement had, prosecutors had, judges, other allied professionals. We trained over 500 police officers. We sent 2 prosecutors to a national training. We sent 2 judges to national training. We conducted multiple cross-agency trainings for over 100 people, including magistrates, social services providers, prosecutors, law enforcement, court personnel, mental health providers, faith-based service providers, any kind of local service provider. We were trying to get everyone as much red flag training as they possibly could. It also helped them all to get into the room, learn a little bit about each other, meet each other. So when you had a problem or you needed something or you wanted to help provide services, you knew a person to call instead of just calling an agency. We were able to build upon established relationships with our social services and law enforcement so that our staff was able to connect older adult victims with resources quicker. We also were able to increase awareness in the community as a whole about services for older adults. We did television commercials, we did advertisements in local publications. We created posters and took those posters and framed posters out to different organizations where older adults might frequent so that it could tell them about the services available. We took rat cards. We ran multiple PSAs and commercials about abuse in later life and the services that we had available at our Family Justice Center, where our abuse in later life staff worked. So throughout the training, I will say that the folks that were partnered together really benefited a lot from the support that we got from NCALL. We made this grant application, we received the grant, we're in some ways like, okay, now what do we do? But NCALL was really, really helpful. They helped us to identify needed policy changes and gave us a lot of training, helped us to be able to better serve the victims and to hold offenders accountable.
Thanks,
That's it for me.
Krista. Thank you. We're going to move to Minnesota now.
All right, thank you. And Krista, I think that you and I probably had real similar experiences with this grant, which was a fantastic grant. And I am probably the biggest cheerleader and know so much about and so supportive people and organizations and communities applying, because I saw firsthand the systemic change that it created and it has been institutionalized in the community that I live and work in. The first grant that I managed and coordinated was located in the town of Moorhead, Minnesota. The town itself is about 45,000 individuals, and the map of Minnesota, you have the Minneapolis-St. Paul, where that big yellow area is. And if you kind of go up kind of to the left, and Fargo, North Dakota is on one side of this river on the border between North Dakota and Minnesota, and Moorhead is on the other side. The county that Moorhead is in is about 65,000 people, but between the two counties of North Dakota and Minnesota, the metropolitan area is about 250,000 individuals. So next slide. The entity that was the grant recipient was the Clay County Attorney's Office. And at the time, I was a director of victim services in the county attorney's office. Some communities will call it district attorney's office. It's basically the prosecuting office for the county. I had previously come from the Domestic Violence Sexual Assault Coalition for the state of North Dakota. And so I had a pretty in-depth and robust background working with domestic violence and sexual assault victims prior to coming to the county attorney's office. And when we, and I'd gotten a lot of experience with federal grants. So when we applied for this grant, it was really interesting to me, having at the time worked in the domestic violence sexual assault arena for almost 17 years. And I had not heard of adult protection services, which was one of the biggest signs to me that this was definitely needed for our community. The law enforcement officer who was selected to participate had not heard of adult protection services either, and he'd been in the county for about 20 years, and the adult protection service worker had not really worked with law enforcement. So we were all very experienced professionals, but very siloed in terms of working abuse in later life cases. So when we were awarded the grant in 2009, we did a needs assessment very similar to what Krista's community did. And we were able to identify all of those service gaps. And then we created the CCR, the Coordinated Community Response Team. And that really provided an opportunity to break down those silos and give different agencies an awareness of what each of them could offer to an abuse in later life victim, and also what their agency's limitations were. So there were a number of policy and protocol changes that occurred within our law enforcement agencies, our domestic violence and sexual assault program, who actually changed the mission of their program to include abuse in later life, because they'd only been previously working with intimate partner violence. So they expanded it to include sons and daughters who were perpetrating against their parents. Adult protection services, there were policy and protocol changes, and also in the prosecutor's offices. And it gives me a lot of pride to know that those were institutionalized and that collaboration still exists to this day after almost 14 years. So law enforcement and adult protection services have joint interviews. The two people that were part of the original grant, they have both retired. And when the new individuals came into the positions, they just were told that this is how things were done. And that's how they just have done them now since 2009. And with our domestic violence sexual assault program and adult protection services, they actually work on joint safety planning together, because as we talked about in the previous slide, you have adult protection services who may not have that background and information around power and control issues, and domestic violence sexual assault may not have some of that understanding of older adult issues as far as mild cognitive impairment and things that adult protection looks for. So it provides a much more holistic approach to safety planning when you're working with older adults. Next slide. So as I said, Moorhead, Minnesota is on one side of the Red River, and this is a picture of the actual river. Literally one side of the river is Minnesota and the other side is North Dakota. Fargo, North Dakota, or Cass County, North Dakota, they knew and were aware of the work that was being done on the Minnesota side. And so they wanted to have their own grant to work in their community, because they saw how beneficial it was to the Minnesota side. So next slide. And very similar to what we had done in Moorhead, Minnesota, the grant this time was awarded to the domestic violence sexual assault program. The program works with the communities on both sides of the river, and so they were very integral in creating new services and developing the CCR, and also working with adult protection services. And so they were the ones that submitted and were selected as a grantee. So needs assessment was completed on the North Dakota side. And again, that position was created, and that position again is still in existence today. So, 11 years later, it's become institutionalized. The wonderful thing that occurred after, I think actually during this grant, was that CCR that was initially created in Minnesota. They started in North Dakota, and then eventually the two of them combined, and now it is a community-wide, and perhaps, and Janice would know this, and perhaps NCALL would as well, perhaps the only one that is a dual state and continues to meet. The partnering agencies, as people retire or move on to different professions, they're always providing an increase of awareness of what other agencies do and the different policies and protocols that were created and that were changed. Again, on the North Dakota side, institutionalized collaboration with the joint interviews, joint safety planning, and case management. We'll go down to the next slide. All right. So I think the thing that is most, gives me the most pride about is the system change that occurred and has been institutionalized. Like I previously said, it really was able to bring together that broad range of professionals. And we started with kind of a core group, and that core group continues to expand as individuals and other professionals become aware of the CCR and want to get involved. When you work with professionals that work with older adults, it really provides that support and a more holistic support for victim safety and ensuring offender accountability. And really with system change, it involves identifying what is working, what is not working, and then really addressing what those challenges are and working together to combat those challenges. It involves improving systems response by looking at how agencies communicate with each other and how they also collaborate with each other. It also involves creating and enhancing policies that really strengthen how we support victims and how to make sure that there's increased offender accountability. So this is probably one of the biggest things that really can come out of being a grant recipient for this Abuse in Later Life grant. And then next slide, and then it's yours, Martie.
NCALL is the comprehensive technical assistance provider for this Abuse in Later Life grant. Since 1999, NCALL has been providing technical assistance, consultation, and training to individuals working in the domestic violence field and elder abuse. We're a national project and we have 5 staff members. And here on the slide, you see our mission statement, and our work involves, we work as a team through various partnerships and collaborations, and we target, we are able to provide specific targeted support and information to individuals and programs that are working in the field. We have a lot of resources. I mentioned that we are the technical assistance provider for the Abuse in Later Life grant. We also have created a curriculum, a 3-day training institute for prosecutors, and we coordinate the event logistics for this training, and we co-facilitate it with prosecutors who specialize in elder abuse and other subject matter experts. Finally, we have a resource center. We can help problem solve, we can consult with grantees on this grant. We organize meetings and other opportunities for grantees to talk and share their challenges, etc. We have created the grantee orientation and the train the trainers. You're going to hear a little bit more about the training involved in this project from Janice in a bit, but we provide the training of trainers so you can deliver it. We will review and provide technical assistance and feedback on materials and products that you may create as part of this project. And I mentioned we facilitate communication between grantees, and the way we do this is through monthly meetings. We also have a listserv and the NCALL website. NCALL.us is our website, and you can get lost on this website looking at all the resources available. There's a publications library. There are some publications that are specific to some backgrounds, cultures, or identities. For example, there's a toolkit on tribal response. There's another one on working with older African American survivors, or working with the faith community. And all these materials will be sent out to you after the webinar. So don't worry that I'm going quickly over these. We also have a video library with videos not only recorded of experts in the area, but also the Lifting Up Voices series, where you will hear from survivors. We have outreach materials that you can use and edit to fit your community, some specifically for World Elder Abuse Awareness Day also, and our social media. You can connect with us there. So you've heard why we should care about this issue. You've heard what this grant program might look like in a community. And now I turn it over to Janice Green to talk about the specifics of this program. Janice?
Thank you, Martie. You can go to the next slide. The Abuse in Later Life program was created under the Violence Against Women Act. And under the program, we support a comprehensive approach to addressing abuse in later life. And that includes domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, stalking, neglect, abandonment, economic abuse, or willful harm committed against individuals who are 50 years of age or older. Next. The program has 4 mandatory purpose areas. Every grantee must do training, cross-training, provide victim services, and develop a coordinated community response to abuse in later life. And this is all with the goal of enhancing victim safety and increasing offender accountability. Next. Under training, grantees provide direct training for criminal justice professionals. So every grantee will do local training for law enforcement. They do an 8-hour training that is delivered by a multidisciplinary team of individuals from your community that come together. You put together a training team. We bring them together to a national training, and we help the groups learn the curriculum and practice and be prepared to come back to your community to do their training. I believe when we were talking about Norfolk, Krista mentioned they trained over 500 officers, and that's the way we're able to do that. If we were just send in national trainers to do a training, you would get maybe 1 or 2 days of training and that would be it. But by having those trainers be there on the local level, grantees are able to train over a long period of time and train, in some cases, hundreds of officers in their community to recognize issues around elder abuse. We support the National Institute on the Prosecution of Elder Abuse. Every year we do a national training where we bring prosecutors from around the country together to learn how to address cases of elder abuse. And we also do a Judicial Institute where each grantee has the opportunity to send judges and magistrates from their community to a national training on elder abuse. Next. In addition to those mandatory trainings, grantees also have the opportunity to choose to provide training to civil attorneys, faith leaders in communities, and to healthcare providers. Next. Cross-training. Every grantee does a project kickoff event, and we do that by having a couple of consultants come out from NCALL, and they will do a one-day training in your community. This can be anywhere from 20 to 100 individuals in your community who work with older individuals around this, older individuals and stakeholders. And they will do in the morning training to help make it clear why working out of silos is important and why it's important to work together to make sure that victims don't fall through the cracks. The second half of the day is spent talking about how your community is going to move forward in addressing abuse in later life. We look at this grant just as the first step for your community. It gives communities finances and time and resources to figure out where is their community's efforts to address elder abuse now, and where do they want it to be, say, 5 years from now, and how can we get your community started on that path. In addition to that training event, we also do cross trainings so that you can bring together the stakeholders in your community that provide victim services so that they can talk about what services are available and how you can go about creating wraparound services for older individuals in your community. Next. Every grantee receives funds to do victim services. Here are just some of the examples of what most communities use those funds for. And they also do outreach to make sure that older individuals, those who care for them, and those who work with them are aware of what services are available in your communities to support older victims. Next. And finally, every grantee has to create or enhance a coordinated community response to elder abuse. That group meets on a regular and ongoing basis. And as mentioned earlier, the goal of that group is to look at systems change. How do we ensure that no matter how a victim comes into the system, that they are going to get the resources that they need to enhance their safety? Next. So next, I want to talk a little bit about the funding process. Every year since 2002, OVW has released a solicitation for funding for the Abuse in Later Life program. That solicitation usually goes out somewhere between September and December. And once the solicitation goes out, it's usually open for 7 to 8 weeks for people to put together their application and to submit it for funding. If you're trying to find the solicitation, the first link here at grants.gov, if you go to that website and there's a search area and you type in later life, it will bring up the solicitation for the Abuse in Later Life program. The second link takes you directly to the OVW website. And on our website, you can look under funding and you'll see open solicitations, and it will list for you all of the solicitations that are open, and you can look for the Abuse in Later Life program there. Also, at the following link, notification of solicitation release, you can go today, and I recommend just while it's still on your mind, you can go today to that link. You can put in your email address, and when solicitations come out from OVW for funding, it will send out a notification to you so that you become aware of the availability of the solicitation. Next. Under this program, the eligible entities are states, units of local government, which would be cities, counties, parishes, tribal governments or tribal organizations, population-specific organizations, victim service providers, and state, tribal, or territorial domestic violence or sexual assault coalitions. Every grantee under this program is required to have a minimum of 4 MOU partners: a law enforcement agency, a prosecutor's office, adult protective services or another part of the aging network, and a domestic violence and/or sexual assault victim service provider. Now, I want to say, if you're not sure whether you are an eligible entity, your agency or your organization, or whether you have the right MOU partners, please contact the email address listed here, obw.elder@usdoj.gov, because what we want to avoid is you going to all the trouble with your community partners to put in an application and then the application not being accepted because a wrong member is listed. So I'll give you a perfect example. You have to have a law enforcement agency. We've had situations where an application was perfect, except for the fact that instead of a law enforcement agency, they put a law enforcement training organization. A training organization is not a law enforcement agency. They don't have policing powers. And so for that reason, we weren't able to look at their application. So if you're never sure about something, it's not a problem. Reach out to us and we can let you know if you are eligible. And if you're not, we can help you think through, is there someone else in your community that you could add to your work in order so that you would be able to submit an application. Next. The award amounts for communities with a service area of up to 400,000 people, you can apply for up to $400,000. The next level is if you have up to 700,000 people, you can apply for $600,000. And if you're in a population that has more than 700,000 people, you can apply for up to $750,000. And if you are in a statewide project, you can apply for up to $750,000. And those award amounts are for, if you're a new grantee, a 4-year grant, and if you're a continuation grantee, a 3-year grant. Next. So what can you use the funds from the program for? Well, you can use it to hire a full-time project coordinator, and that person's role is going to be to make sure that all of the various pieces of this grant program are properly enacted and to juggle the multiple pieces of work. So making sure that the training is taking place, making sure that the needs assessments that you heard about earlier are occurring, making sure that victim services are being implemented. You can use it to cover the costs for law enforcement to attend training. So if you have law enforcement in your community, they're taking time out of their normal work in order to go and attend the 8-hour training, which means their department has to backfill them for that time. You can charge the time that those law enforcement officers are going to the 8-hour training to the grant in order to reimburse the law enforcement agency. We noted that there are a number of training events. As part of your funding, you will include money in your budget to send people to those national training events. For example, new grantee orientation. Next. You're going to use funds for victim services. If you're a new grantee, a minimum of 25% of your award has to go to victim services. If you are a continuation grantee, a minimum of 33% of your grant funds must go to victim services. Some of the things our grantees use that for is to hire a case manager or an advocate specifically working with victims who are 50 and over, to do crisis intervention, to provide emergency or transitional housing, to provide transportation, limited civil legal assistance, and emergency funds. So for example, if a victim needs food, prescriptions, medication, or assistive devices because they have been denied or destroyed or stolen by their abuser, the grant can use funds to help put that person, give that person back those things that they need in order to be in a better position. Next. So how do you prepare to apply for the funding? If you're at all interested, I would say the first thing to do is today, go to this link. This is last year's, the 2023 solicitation that came out last year. The solicitation doesn't change very much from year to year. So go ahead, download the application and start looking at it. See what the different requirements are and the different things that you're going to need to put together in order to submit an application. Then, knowing who needs to be a part of this project, start identifying the people or the organizations in your communities that should be a part of this application with you, and start meeting with them to discuss the possibility of them becoming partners. After that, look and see what already exists in your community. So if you're going to, for the grant, have to create a coordinated community response, is there already a group in your community that's addressing this issue that you should be using as a jump off point? What services are available in your community so that when you plan on creating services, you're not duplicating effort, but instead bringing those services together as part of your coordinated community response. Next. Reach out to NCALL and to OVW, that would be me, with your questions. If as you're going through the solicitation, there's something you have a question about, both NCALL and OVW are here to answer your questions. You can also talk to current or past grantees about their applications, about how they address the requirements for the application. You can reach out to NCALL and they can put you in touch with current or past grantees that you could talk to, who would be happy to share with you how they applied and what the experience has been like for them. If you feel like your community would benefit from this program, but you don't think that you'd be ready to apply, say, between September and December of this year, still move ahead and plan a year in advance. We have a number of people over the years who have come together in the community and said, we want this money, but we want to put in a really solid application. So they may pull down the application now and spend a year putting all the pieces in place so that when the next solicitation comes out, they're in a solid position to submit an application. Next. Major tip, start early. Start now, start today. Go to the website, download the solicitation, and start preparing. 3 steps. First, read the solicitation. The last solicitation was 45 pages. A lot of that information is just the technical requirements, technical rules, etc. But the next thing you do after you've read the entire solicitation from beginning to end, go back with a highlighter and highlight what are we asking you to provide. And I would recommend you start with what we call the project narrative. When everyone submits an application, those applications and they are scored. And so the program narrative is where we start the scoring process. And you can see for every part of the application that we score, you can see how many points each of those sections receives in the scoring process. So take out a highlighter, go to the places that we score, figure out what it is that we are asking. So in some cases, the questions are just for new applicants. In some cases, it's for continuation applicants. Figure out which category you're in, highlight specifically what we're asking for, and then step number 3, answer the questions that we're asking for. You'd be surprised how many times people lose points because somewhere along the way, they skip a question and as a result lose points and hurt their chances of receiving funding. Another thing to be aware of is every grantee has to submit a memorandum of understanding or an MOU with signatures from all their MOU partners. If you go to the link listed here, you will see a sample MOU so that you can start drafting the MOU you will need for this program. Next. The very last page of the solicitation is a checklist. And so you can literally go through that checklist to double check and make sure that everything that we are asking you to submit, that you've done that. And then when it comes time to actually submit your application, you will see on the front page of the solicitation, your deadline. there are two deadlines. The first is your deadline for grants.gov. You would go into grants.gov and you would upload the two forms listed here. Once you've completed that, you would go to step 2, and there's a second deadline for this, which is the deadline to submit your full application, including attachments, in Just Grants, usdoj.gov. And please remember, you must submit both in grants.gov and Just Grants before the deadline. Otherwise, we will not be able to review your application. Next. Just a reminder, we have funded well over 120 communities over the years in this program. I know when you see the 45 pages, it can seem daunting, but the thing to remember is you are not alone. I'm here at OVW to work with you. The NCALL staff, who has been a partner with OVW from the beginning, they are amazing. They are here to help. Former grantees, current grantees are also here to help you. So just remember, you are not in this alone. We are here to support you in this effort to make sure that the elder individuals and older individuals in your communities who are victims can become safer and live a better life absent abuse. Next. This is my contact information. If you have any questions about the program, please feel free to drop me an email. I'm happy to answer your questions. If we need to schedule a phone call, happy to do that as well. Thank you for your time today. And Martie, I'll let you wrap things up.
Thank you, Janice. And here is my contact information. You can also contact us at ncall@ncall.us. Any questions at all on this presentation? We ran out of time. We don't have time to field the questions we have now, but we will definitely follow up with you and get back to you. And you also get a copy of this presentation, so you'll have the contact information. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is a growing population, and it is on all of us to try to support older adults and make sure that everyone feels safe and offenders are held accountable. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Take care.